going to ask you guys today, and that we're going to think through a little bit, is could having a national minimum wage be actually leading to unemployment? And that's something that we can't necessarily say yes or no without a bigger picture and a lot more data, but it's something that we're going to take a look at now. So in the economy, in a competitive labour market, we're assuming a few things. So we're assuming that there are many firms looking for labour. We assume that there are many workers with similar or homogeneous skills that are looking to work. We assume that mobility within the labour market is costless, it's seamless. So by that I mean it's easy for firms to post vacancies, to list open positions, and it's also easy for workers to move jobs, to apply for jobs, and we assume that both parties have perfect information. And finally, the assumption that we're going to make is that firms are price makers, so they're deciding the wage, whilst employees or workers are price takers. They accept the wage that is offered to them. So in order to work out the equilibrium or the market wage rate and the equilibrium level of unemployment within an economy, we're going to draw a simple supply and demand diagram that I'm sure you're well used to doing. So I'm going to draw axis here. Now it's always good to use a ruler, as I'm sure your teachers have told you. And to remember to label our axes. So here we've got our y-axis, and this is going to be wage rate. And on the x-axis, we're going to have the quantity of labour. And this is how much, this is synonymous to the level of employment, or how much labour a firm wants to hire. So now what we're going to do is draw our supply and demand curve. So we know that supply is a upward sloping curve, and we'll label that as well. It's always important, especially in exams, to get those last few marks. You don't want to be missing them out for something silly. And then we're going to have our demand curve. And now we can work out the equilibrium wage rate and the equilibrium quantity of labour by simply looking at the intersection of these two curves. Now this is a concept that I'm sure you're familiar with. So we take this intersection, we can draw it out here, and this is going to give us W star, let's say. And taking it down to the x-axis, we're going to get Q star. Now what this tells us is that for any given wage rate, let's say W star, firms within an economy are going to hire Q star amount of workers. That's what that tells us. Now, if I were to draw in our national minimum wage that's, let's say, is above this market equilibrium wage rate, let's say it looks something like that. And again, we're gonna label this. So we're going to say national minimum wage. Now we can look at what is happening here. So here, when this wage rate is fixed somewhere above this equilibrium or this market wage rate, we can see that supply of labour, which is where the supply curve intersects this new wage rate, is greater than the demand for labour, which is here. So we can see that by fixing this wage rate to somewhere higher than the market equilibrium, what we've done is we've created excess supply for labour. And so what this means, because this national minimum wage is a government mandate, it's not possible for companies to undercut one another and pay less and less. That's not going to be possible. They have to pay this level of wages. So natural market forces can't work in the way that they normally would once we fix this wage. And what that means is that we're never going to reach this equilibrium level of wage rate or quantity of labour. And by that I mean we're never going to reach full employment. And the definition for full employment is where everyone who is looking for work is able to find work. And that is as a result of having this national minimum wage. This is known as real wage unemployment. And real wage unemployment can be calculated essentially through this gap. It's the difference in the supply for labour versus the demand for labour. So to reiterate, when markets are allowed to operate freely, we will reach this market equilibrium where the wage paid is this W star and the quantity of labour hired is Q star. And at this intersection, that's where we reach full employment within an economy. However, when we fix wages to a rate that's higher than this market equilibrium, and this is mandated by the government, it's impossible for these market forces to operate as they would have done. And so therefore it's impossible to reach this full level of employment given by this market equilibrium. So we've answered this question, can having a minimum wage lead to unemployment? And the answer is yes, clearly. We've shown that and we've proved that. Now, if we wanted to get a bit deeper and talk about whether this is necessarily a bad thing, then that's definitely beyond the scope of this lesson here, because there are many different factors at play within the labour market. There are many different forms of unemployment, and there's also kind of a base level of unemployment that is acceptable within an economy. It's very unlikely to reach full employment in the real world because there are so many factors at play. So to answer this question of whether this is a bad thing, whether we should scrap national minimum wages as a result of this real wage unemployment, that's a question for another day, and I'll let you guys think about that and develop your opinions. But I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. I certainly have, and I hope you all have a lovely day. So bye.